Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Ritchie Allen Show in association with DavidIcke.com.
Let's introduce our first guest then. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of the programme that she is a former News of the World journalist and a Sunday Times best-selling author. Among the books she's published are the excellent How Nick Davis Hired Me to Spy on My Former Colleagues at the News of the World. And she's also published For the Kill, well, I should say Hodder and Stoughton published For the Kill, In for the Kill, I should say, and Searching for Daddy, which reached the Sunday Times bestseller list and appeared on the BBC and Channel 4. Now, she went to see David Icke on the Isle of Wight a few weeks ago and told him her story. It's astonishing and it's extraordinary, but it's not something that we haven't heard before, and certainly that he hasn't heard before. They recorded that conversation, but David recommended that our guests get in touch with us and come on this programme. So it's a real pleasure to welcome to the show the journalist Christine Joanna Hart. Christine, welcome to the programme. How are you?
Oh, thanks. Really good, Ritchie. I'm hoping my sound is okay and not too loud.
No, it's sounding crystal clear, Christine. It sounds like you're in the room, so I'm delighted about that. And I really am thrilled that you're on the show. And we're going to be with you, of course, right till the end of the programme. And there's an awful lot to get through between now and then, of course. But give us an idea. What motivated you to go and see David on the Isle of Wight? What was it?
Well, I had read one of his books. It's the Children of the Revolution?
Children of the Revolution, yeah.
Yeah, the one with the green lizard face on the front. I bought it quite a while ago. No, actually, it was his the second one that I bought, which was called
Children of the Matrix, actually, I think it might have been. It might have been Children of the Matrix, just in case anybody's wondering what to look at. Yes, the one, yeah.
It wasn't that one. That's my first one I bought of his a good few years ago. It was Deception, Perception.
The Deception, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just reading it one day, and it said about the phone hacking, and it said that David had written that he believed that the phone hacking was a setup by the state. So because I knew that it had been, and I was the one who set it up, that I thought then and there that I would like to get in touch with him. But that was, I think that was about a year ago, and it was only somebody told me that he'd written something about me in one of his books that I thought, well, I'll contact him. So I contacted him and arranged to meet, and we met at the Priory Bay Hotel, which is a really nice hotel on the Isle of Wight. It's beautiful, actually. And when I walked in the drawing room, he was sitting there by the piano, and he said, "Okay, what do you want to interview me about?" And I said, "No, you're interviewing me."
He did say that to me. That made me laugh. Yeah.
I know, it's quite funny.
Because he would do obviously an awful lot of interviews. So he got in touch with me anyway, and of course I heard about you. Obviously I've heard of you before. I've read you over the years, and here you are. And we are going to talk about phone hacking and why it was set up by the state and why they wanted to do that, and your part in it. But I want to talk at the beginning. When I say I want to, you can take this in any direction you want to go. But what's really fascinating, obviously, from the very beginning, is your exposure, Christine, to Monarch mind programming when you were young. Do you want to kick off with that and talk to us about that?
Yeah, obviously, when you mention something like Monarch, it's not really provable whether you've had it done to you. I mean, I know a lot of people are coming forward and saying that they're super soldiers and they've had the programming, and people are like, well, how do you know? And it's a kind of thing that I don't think is provable. I came about it. Well, I came in contact with the literature on Monarch programming when I had written In for the Kill, and I wrote In for the Kill about meeting Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler, and I had studied two different serial killers and met them. One was Ian Brady, the Moors murderer, murderer, and I'd met him on three occasions, and I hadn't really got what I wanted from him. I had a bee in my bonnet that their murders were something to do with them being adopted, something to do with their foster parents fiddling with them in some kind of way. And I knew that Brady had alter personalities, different personalities, but I still didn't really work out why he murdered those 5 children. And so I'd kind of left it to one side, and I saw the serial killer Kenneth Bianchi. He is one of the Hillside Stranglers, Angelo Bono and Bianchi. Back in the 70s, they terrorized Los Angeles, and he was on some kind of crime program, and he had an alter, and the alter was called Steve. And you actually see when they're filming him in the cell, all of a sudden, you know, at one moment he's like really mild-mannered and he's like Ken, the security guard, the husband, the father. And the next minute he stands up and he says to the cameraman, you're the one who's trying to make me leave him. And this other personality comes out that boasts about killing the 13 girls and strangling them. So I immediately contacted the psychiatrist who had met him at the time, and he sent me Bianchi's medical records, the whole files. That's Dr. Ralph Allison. And in them, there was these really fascinating transcripts where most people have written, most journalists have written about the case, say that the Steve thing was Bianchi putting it on, and he was just playing up to try and get a lesser sentence. But when you read the transcripts, you can see that Steve is a real whole personality. And unless Bianchi was a Hollywood superstar or a Hollywood screenplay writer, he couldn't have invented what Steve was saying. And Steve seemed almost like a teenager, a disembodied teenager. And it was fascinating to actually read these medical records and see, just hear him talking. It was fascinating. It's just kind of like disembodied creature that didn't live in a body mostly, just kind of floated around the stratosphere. And so I wanted to meet Bianchi. So I started off a correspondence with him. He invited me to come and see him more or less straight away. And at that time, Nick Davies from The Guardian was investigating the phone hacking. And he had come to me and said to me, did I know a man called John Boyle, who he believed had brought in the phone hacking, who was a multimillionaire who works for the ex-spook agencies, the MI6 agencies, who do the black bag stuff for the government. And I said, no, I don't know him. But I did know him. He actually was an ex-boyfriend of mine, and I had worked for him when I was 19. And so I was sitting in a position of denying all this to Nick Davies. And then Davies said, you brought Boyle into the News of the World. It was you. And you introduced him to Greg Miskew, who was my news editor when I was a journalist there. And so I was denying this. And Nick Davies was trying to get me to help him with his book, Hack Attack, and to sort of fess up all the stuff about Boyle and what he'd done and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And
so basically, Christine, sorry to interrupt you, but so basically he was saying that basically you started all of this by bringing this guy with these connections to the intelligence agencies, that you gave them the in to start the whole hacking scandal. You could say hoax, couldn't you? You could say the hacking scandal hoax, because if it was deliberately a kind of a psyop on the people, you know, to get them to demand that the press is restricted more. So he's basically saying, that's your fault, Christine. You knew this guy. You brought him in.
Yeah, he did say that. And actually, Wheating, Operation Wheating, the cops handling the case, rang me at the same time. And they said to me, Clive Goodman, the royal editor, has it in his diary. They were going through his private diaries. And they said in one of his diaries, it said, Christine Hart introduced the phone hacker to the News of the World. And I said, look here, because they thought the phone hacker was Glenn Mulcaire. I said, I didn't introduce Glenn Mulcaire. I introduced John Boyle. And of course, John Boyle was the Mr. Big, and Glenn Mulcaire was his office boy who he trained up. So they hauled me in to talk about Boyle. At the same time, Nick Davies wanted the lowdown on Boyle and the MI6 connections. And I said to him that I would work for him as long as he paid for me to go out to see Bianchi. And as long as he gave me a contract to do a story on Bianchi for The Guardian. So he paid me £1,000 kind of to sign a contract with him that I would spy on John Boyle and that I would spy on Greg Miskew, who was my news editor. And we'd also dated at one point. And so he wanted me to spy on Boyle and he wanted me to spy on Miskew and to sort of tape them and to try and so he could get evidence on them. So that was going on. And he gave me another advance from Merope Mills to write this story on the Hillside Strangler. So I basically went flying off to America, The Guardian, paid for that, and interviewed Bianchi. And
what year was this, Christine?
That was 2000, I think it was 2008, something like that.
Okay, right. Yeah. Bianchi was getting on then, wasn't he?
Pardon?
Bianchi was getting on a bit then, wasn't he? He would have been in his 70s at that stage.
No. He was young because he was 25 when they arrested. Bono was 45. So basically, Bianchi blamed the whole thing on Bono, who was, a bit of a ladies' man. But the real demonic killer was actually Bianchi. He pulled it off pretty good. And he was about, I think, 57 when I met him. I had 8 hours with him on one day and 8 hours the next day down at Walla Walla. And interestingly, he kind of flicked through these different altars. One of them was really terrifying. I nearly just got up and ran out because it was like something looking at me through his eyes that almost looking at me as if I was food. It was really, It gave me a kind of primal feeling of just pure terror. And he was interesting. I mean, he was what I had been searching for, although it sounds weird. I'd been looking to see what it is inside these killers that made them do it. And it was almost like I was being haunted. It's almost like when I was around the house, I felt almost as if someone was watching me. And I said to Chris Berry D, who was another crime writer who had met Bianchi, I said, when you met Bianchi, did you notice anything spooky about him? Or when you were writing to him, was there anything like spooky going on? And he said, yeah, you mean that he can haunt you in your house and project himself inside your head and all this kind of stuff? And I said, oh my God. And he said, yeah, he's got these like demonic powers.
Hang on a second now, Christine. This is incredible. Yeah. This is amazing. So this guy had, or has, I should say, possesses the ability to project himself beyond the walls of his prison cell and impact on somebody, whether it's in, the next state or whether it's across the world, and, bring his presence to where you are. It's incredible that you were validated by this other gentleman saying, yeah, he can do this. This is absolutely amazing. Right.
It was amazing what I wanted to do, because I was feeling really, really scared. I mean, one night I was sitting there watching the TV and I could almost feel his presence, and almost feel it as if it was just a second, but I can feel it inside my mind as if trying to look out my eyes, like trying to remote view me. And it was only a fraction of a second, but it was terrifying because of who Bianchi is. And the next moment I went upstairs, laid down on the bed, and I got all these images, and they were really awful images. They were just the most disgusting images, but I was absolutely terrified. And so when I rang Chris Berry D, because all this was going on, I didn't want to lead him. I didn't want to say, oh, this is happening to me. Did it happen to you? I just wanted him to, to find out the truth, basically. And he said it straight away. And he said to me, he said, he like the prison walls can't hold him. I said, well, thanks very much for warning me. He said, I did warn you. I said, I know, but you don't really, you don't listen when someone says, oh, be careful. He's sort of, very powerful. You just think, oh, yeah, sure, I can handle that. But it put me in mind, when people say be careful of serial killers, I always thought, well, why? They're in prison, they're caged down. Why would you possibly be afraid of them? But Bianchi, he's the real deal. He's terrifying. And there was a young girl recently spoke to me on Facebook. She said, oh, I'm writing to Bianchi. And you could tell she thought it was a laugh. And I warned her. I said, don't, because, you know, he can, you know, he can come and get you, basically, you know.
I'm always amazed, Christy. I'm always amazed when I hear about people writing to serial killers. You know, if you hadn't said that your fears about Bianchi's ability to project himself, if they hadn't have been confirmed by somebody else, I would, of course, be the devil's advocate. And if I was your friend, I'd say, Christine, you met a very, very disturbed individual. That's had an impact on you. I mean, whether you're a man or whether you're a woman, you're going to be moved emotionally by meeting somebody who's capable of doing these things. And I would have said that, but yet these things that you were feeling and noticing were validated by somebody else. It's amazing. I just want to... Some of our listeners won't know you, and this will be brand new to them. And I want to kind of get a timeline going here, because it's great to talk about this. It's really, really interesting. Beyond anything now, you know, that I imagined. We're going to talk more about the phone hacking, excuse me. But I want to talk a little bit more about, because we did mention the Monarch and we did mention your own childhood. Because that led you to kind of looking at these people. And when you said Bianchi and Brady, it's important to remind our listeners that you were looking for certain shared characteristics amongst these serial killers. You mentioned their childhood and you mentioned orphans and that. If you want to get into that now.
Yeah, well, basically with Bianchi, and just to add there, in case I forget, that what got rid of Bianchi from Chris Berry D and my life, not just stopping writing to him, because he can clearly do what he wants. Clearly, he's got this demonic power. I don't know if it's from MK Ultra, or, you know, they say when they do that on children, they attach the demonic to a part of them. I don't know if it is that. I suspect that it is that, actually, because I suspect that it's the Steve personality that has the demonic attached. I did see it one time because I'm astrally awake, and I did have, when I went into astral consciousness, I did see that part of him, and I did see something attached to him that looked like a kind of a sort of Draco type, lizard type, winged creature, which at the time I just wrote about and I found quite interesting. But that's before I knew about the Monarch.
Right.
Mind control. But the way that Dee got rid of the attacks by Bianchi was to go to the church. And I found the same thing, that I went running off to a Catholic church that I used to go to as a kid, spoke to a priest that I knew, and he gave me some prayers. And literally, it's quite interesting that when you pray, when you call out for the name of Jesus Christ, that everything goes, you know, it's just there's no power there. It's just, it stops, you know, straight away. It's that powerful that you can stop any kind of attack like that just by praying.
How incredible. You know, I had Father Vince Lampert on this program before. He's the Catholic Church's exorcist in America. He's the only guy in America. He's a New Yorker, and he described an exorcism. And it was astonishing. And I remember David was listening to it, and David got in touch with me, and he said, it's incredible. Through the religions, the way these things are called out of the body and the way they're pulled through the head of the person, you know, afflicted by them, it's the same. It's extraordinary stuff, this. I just want to do a very quick recap. Folks, if you're just joining the programme, we've been joined tonight by the former News of the World journalist and Sunday Times bestselling author Christine Joanna Hart. Amongst their books are How Nick Davis Hired Me to Spy on My Former Colleagues at the News of the World. We'll mention her other books later on as well. We'll tell you where you can get them. Christine was in touch with David Icke, went to see David because some of her own experiences, she realised that David had been writing about some of these things, got in touch with him, went to see him, and that's how she's ended up talking with us tonight. We're going to talk about, I really want to get into your own childhood, Christine, and your own exposure to this stuff, and when later on you realised that you'd been exposed to it, because it's so important, this, Christine, because we've heard men, women, not children, but men and women from around the world on this programme, totally unconnected, credible, serious people, not looking for attention, but they've told stories that are so eerily similar to what you've talked about. It's absolutely incredible. Do you want to talk about Monarch mind control and your own exposure to that?
Well, interestingly, Ritchie, it was after I'd published In for the Kill. So I was at the point in my life where Nick Davies was breathing down my neck. I was in a bad situation that I had brought John Boyle into the News of the World. He had basically, because my background was investigative, I'd come from his world. I'd worked as a spook most of my life. And so what happened, I'd lost a six-figure sum, and I was feeling bad that I had brought John Boyle in, and I was kicking myself because basically I'd lost. I was working as well for the Daily Mirror, but most of my income. So I'd written In for the Kill, and I'd added stuff about the Real IRA, meeting the Real IRA. I'd added stuff meeting Brady, added stuff about Bianchi, and added about the phone hacking and my background as a spy. And this was published, and I felt quite bad because the whole book to me didn't make sense. And I thought when I got to the end of it that I would see my life clearly and kind of make more sense of my life. And the book really didn't make sense of it. And although I did a few bits of TV around it and talking about meeting two world famous serial killers, I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction that I had really got to the bottom of things when it came to Bianchi specifically. I felt, there was a puzzle. I'd seen this vision on the astral creature, but nothing really made sense. And I was sitting there really with this like chaos around me. The phone hacking trials were just about to start. I was a police witness for Wheating, and my book In for the Kill had just come out, and it wasn't really going as well as I thought. And I didn't blame the public because it didn't make sense to me. It almost seemed like a silly, boastful book. And I was friends with a man called Fritz Springmeier on Facebook, and only because he talked about aliens and Area 51, and that had always been an interest of mine because I'd always kind of had a lot of dreams about greys just constantly. So I was very interested in them. And so I kind of emailed Fritz and said, I'd like to interview you one time, even though because I work for Mainstream, I knew that really I wouldn't interview him, but it was just to make contact. And then I joined him on Facebook, and a friend of his, an American girl called Anna, she all of a sudden said to me, you're Christina, I've just read your book In for the Kill. So I said, oh, well, thanks very much for reading it. And she said, I need to talk to you. So I said, well, yeah, fine, fire away. And she hopped over to private messaging me. I think I added her as a friend, and she had rather an attractive picture of herself. And she said to me, you're a puppet, you're a marionette. I can see from your book that you're a monarch, you've been mind programmed, and you've been dancing your whole life to someone else's agenda. The spying, I'd been recruited from my children's home into spying, and then worked my way into Fleet Street, and I got very close to the Real IRA as well. And then I'd sort of kicked off the phone hacking, and the leader of the Real IRA was in prison and just been put in prison, and the British state were very down on them, but they couldn't go to Dundalk, which was a very clear shot. But I wormed my way into going into the Emerald Bar in Dundalk, and I got very close to the Real for the News of the World and the 20 times. So I'd done all that kind of stuff. He said to me that I was a puppet for the state. I kind of, even though I thought, well, she's just some nutbag, because mind programming is for people that put bako foil on their heads. There's no such thing. And but her saying that I was a puppet, there was something about it that made me sort of not want to press the delete button, and block her.
So I can understand that. So she said to you that she believed that you were recruited from a children's home when you were younger. She said that to you.
Yeah,
she couldn't have known that you spent any time in a children's home, or was that widely known, Christine, at the time?
Well, it was
It was in the book,
See?
right?
It was in the book because the
It's in the
publisher,
book,
I
right?
went to the publisher and I said, look, I just want to write about Bianchi. And he said, oh, write about your whole life. He said, because, boy, you're attracted to evil people. He said, what about, the real IRA? Because I had an affair with one of their commanders. So he said, what about, write about this and write about that. And then when he got to the end of it, he said, oh, you just, you've got the hots for evil men all the time. There's like, oh, you get close to this evil person, that evil person, the news of the world, they're evil. There's the, MI6 guy, he's evil. But I knew that actually wasn't, that's not me. I knew that wasn't me. But the publisher didn't know what to do with it. So eventually I suggested calling it In for the Kill. What did we call it? In for the Kill, a story of hunting evil. But to me, the book didn't make sense. And I don't think to many people it made sense, even though it was, they've done a really beautiful, Random House did a beautiful cover that looks very Silence of the Lambs with the two serial killers on the front. It's a good looking book. But she picked up the book and the publisher had made me write about being an orphan and just everything in there. And she read it and she said to me that I was one of these butterflies, monarchs, and I'd never heard of monarch. I never heard of it at all.
You're just breaking up. You're just breaking up just a little bit.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's not your fault at all. What I'm going to do, sometimes it clears the connection. I'm just going to very quickly disconnect and then reconnect to you very, very quickly so that we can hopefully clear it there. It started to get a bit scratchy, didn't it? Interestingly enough, I know there will be those amongst you who will say it's no coincidence, Ritchie, that when you talk about this sort of thing, is that it gets a bit scratchy sometimes, the sound. But
Sure.
Hopefully Christina's back and we've cleared that. Yeah, it just got a little bit scratchy there, Christine. Thanks for your patience there. So this is an extraordinary thing. So this woman has read the book. She's known to Fritz Springmeier. We've had Fritz on the programme in the past as well. I find him a fascinating man, extraordinarily well-researched and well-briefed man. So he's been on the programme. So she says, unknown to you, you were targeted when you were in a children's home. Now, before she said that, Christine, were your memories of the children's home, what were they? Were they positive? Were they negative? Were they indifferent? What do you think when you look back? Or what did you think when she was saying that? You were obviously thinking, well, what was it like in the children's home?
It wasn't really that. She literally she put me in a group for people that had recovered from mind programming. Now I thought, well, I'm here being a fraud because, I thought, well, there's no such thing. But she was a nice woman. She was American, glamorous. She looked very beautiful. So I just went along with the thing. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just listen to all these people that are in this Facebook group, and because it's quite an interesting thing. And I just stayed in there and I started speaking to other people. And there was one girl in there who had been brought up in an orphanage. And I said to her that I'd had a block. And I couldn't really remember much. And I'd had like loads of therapy to try and get access to my memories. I have memories of my adoptive father sexually abusing me and me having to sort of perform sexual acts on him and him selling me to groups of men and the men being in a circle and, me having to do things to them. And I memorized all that and I'd had therapy around it and I'd come to terms with it that my adoptive father was like that. And my adoptive mother was quite jealous. She was quite violent towards me. And then when I was 13, they kind of carted me back off to care. So life had been quite rough. But when we were younger, we had to, because the orphanage was a Catholic orphanage, and I was adopted by a very Catholic family. My adoptive father's sister was a nun. She was quite senior in the Vatican, actually. She even knew the Pope, the Daughters of St. Paul, the Pauline nuns. And she had a lot of say in my upbringing. And the orphanage was called the Crusades of Rescue, and it was a very it was connected to the church. And interestingly, we weren't just like adopted from there, my brother and I. We had to go back for parties, and the parties were like twice a year. And I remember them being oh, they were just so upsetting because we had to all get in the car, we had to bring some toys, and we had to go back and be amongst the orphans. And they were called jelly and ice cream parties. And I remember being told, as we went in, to focus on the jelly and ice cream, focus on the ice cream, focus on the ice cream. And I didn't really like ice cream that much, but I just remember, I don't know, when I think about focusing on the ice cream, it's like it was done to sort of like Novocaine us out in some kind of way. And I was talking to one of the girls in this group that Anna had put me in, and I said, we used to have parties and, sorry, it's a bit upsetting. Sorry.
It's all right, Christina. I'm not going to say I understand because I don't, but you can take a minute if you want.
Sorry. She said, oh, I went to parties like that too. And she said they take the kids off and they just like abuse them. And she said, did it look like this? And she'd drawn a picture of these kids at the party and sort of going off, and the adults were like at tables and... Oh, fuck. Sorry.
No, you're okay. Don't worry about that. You know, no matter how many times I hear somebody describe stuff like that, Christine, and I'm very lucky I was never exposed to any of that, even though, you know, a good friend of mine from school he was abused by a bishop in County Waterford. No matter how many times I hear it, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, really. And when you don't know what to say, you babble, don't you? I don't know what to say to that. No, don't apologise. No, it's important that you talk about it. It's important because it's important as a story.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it helped me really though, because, you know, she had a picture of her when she was little, and I put a picture up of me, and I said, look, we'll give each other strength, you know, back then. And I just started to memorize things about the bishop. It was run by a bishop called Bishop Philip Harvey, and he was given an OBE eventually, but it was run by him. And I just remember my adopted father kneeling before him and kissing the ring. And then I started having memories of just him saying, bring the children forward, and us like joining hands with other children and sort of coming forward, and him banging that Pope bishop thing. I think it's called a staff or
a scepter. Is it one or the other? Yeah.
Something it's called, yeah. And him banging it on the floor,
yeah.
And the children, all of us being naked. And there'd been stuff on the floor, stuff like written on the floor, but I don't know what it was, or maybe it was some kind of stones, religious, like, you know, like on the floor of on the floor of where it was. And
do you think, Christine, that I'm still so new to this, even though I've been listening to people on the show and reading stuff, do you think that the Monarch programme and what they were trying to do with those children, we now believe, do we? Do we now think we know that a big part of that was to sexually abuse the child? That was a big part of, you know, conditioning that child for what you wanted that child to become.
Yeah, it did. I mean, you know, my father, he was sexually abusive to me. My family was very unlike me. They were a different kind of race almost. I was a blue-eyed blonde, and they were, you know, different colouring. And the people that they said to me were my natural parents. I tried to track them down, and they were a different colouring. So I think there's a lot of secrecy about who my actual blood parents were. It was quite hard for me growing up, and then they put me back in care. But then when I was in care, when I kind of ruined even though I was bright, I kind of, my mother was so envious of me getting to grammar school that I deliberately failed my exams. And so I was left being intelligent and not having a job. And somebody came to our kids' home, and they were looking for some of us to work as tracers at a detective agency that this guy's father had formed. So I went into private detective work as a teenager, and it was from there that I dotted about to start working for these ex-MI6 black bag companies.
This is incredible. Can I do a quick recap? Can I? Sorry now to interrupt you, and I'm just going to do a very quick recap. If you're just joining the programme, Christine Joanna Hart, the former News of the World journalist and Sunday Times best-selling author, is on the programme. Now, we've jumped around a bit. That's okay. It's good. But just to kind of give you a bit of a timeline here, Christine was she spent her early years in various homes, and she was in I suppose in foster homes, and she's learned through her work laterally on the phone hacking investigations and scandals, and also through her meeting with various serial killers for the basis for a book. She's learned that while very, very young, she was targeted by, let's call them operatives, who wanted to, or who were operating this Monarch mind control program on children. And part of this is the sexual abuse and the trauma of children whom are very young. Now, she's talked about that. We're now moving on to where she did some work in her late teens working for a private investigator. That's going to go into, as she just mentioned there, how she ended up in contact even with MI6 and how she worked for them. This is fascinating stuff. I know loads of you want to ask questions about Ian Brady and all of that, and Christine will get to that again a bit later on. But here we are now. She didn't have any recollection of the Monarch mind control program, but it was through her own, I suppose, journey of discovery, trying to find out what was going on, that she ended up meeting Fritz Springmeier, who's very well known, and like David Icke, has written an awful lot about this and researched it. He's been on this programme. And it was a woman who connected to Christine through Fritz Springmeier, who said, what's happened to you is classic Monarch mind control. So this is where we are, right? So you go working for a private detective agency as a teenager. I don't care what teenager you are, Christine. That's exciting, right? That's TV stuff, that. You ended up doing that. What sort of stuff were you doing? Presumably it's the same stuff. You're chasing dodgy husbands and dodgy boyfriends who are cheating on their wives and their girlfriends. That's generally, I imagine that's the sort of stuff you got into.
Well, it didn't. No,
wasn't it? No, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
I would have imagined.
The firm I first started working for was an ex-military firm, and they did a lot of tracking people down, and they did a lot of undercover work. Mostly it was undercover, so I would be doing two jobs. Like I would be perhaps working as a receptionist or a secretary somewhere, and I would be spying on the directors, or I would go and try and do a business deal with somebody and really cozy up to them and, get to know them and basically just get invited to their houses and then kind of rifle through their stuff. And so it was real dirt grade spying, it was,
right.
And it was always really dangerous. And once I got the training in it, I then dotted around to in London, most of the high-end agencies like Hacklight, Knightsbridge Company Services, Caratu, Ogden, CIX Limited, Company X Limited that I work for Knightsbridge Company Services. They're all ex-MI6, and people often say, well, why aren't they MI5? I don't know the answer to that, but the ex-Spook Black Bag companies, it's known as MI6's commercial arm, and I got introduced there really, really quickly, and I started to work for them. And the work it's really good, it's really, really high paid, but most of it is sexual work. It's targeting, and, I might not be knowing why I'm cozying up to a certain very rich businessman or a filmmaker, but that was basically my work, to get really, really close to them. You don't have to go the full way, but it wasn't discouraged, and that.
Was it encouraged? I mean, did anybody encourage it? Did anybody say, if you're getting somewhere, if there's something about to be revealed, if you have to do it, you should do it, Christine. You should go the full way.
Yeah, of course. I
Yeah.
mean, they wanted you to get the information no matter what. They just didn't really care. You weren't really cared about. I mean, they used me. I suppose I was intelligent. I didn't know who the hell I was, so I didn't have an identity. So, once you put on a lovely dress and you're given loads of cash and a decent handbag, off you go and do undercover work, and you really play the part because you haven't really got a life. I didn't really. I think I was so disassociated, so I didn't make friends easily. So I basically lived in a little bedsit and was devoted to the job. So, whenever they wanted someone to go undercover, I was there. And when I wasn't working, I was just back at my bedsit on my own. That was my life. There wasn't really anything going on. And I didn't know why I was like that, but I did feel different from other people. And I was always trying to find out why, and why I didn't find other people very interesting, but I didn't. And there was just the job for a long, long time. There was just the job until I think it was 1995, and I started to work for the News of the World, which was just like an idea. I used to have these grand ideas that I thought came from my higher self, but now I think they were probably, a nudge. I don't really understand what Monarch means. I've been I was interviewed by Douglas Dietrich, who worked with Colonel Aquino, who's the expert, and Douglas Dietrich. I said to Douglas Dietrich, okay, if someone's mind controlled, who's the one at the controls? And he said it's normally off planet, which I found quite interesting. But it's only now, since I've gone through a lot of healing and a lot of awareness, and I've got my astral consciousness back, and I've got myself reintegrated rather than sort of, having different parts separated, that I really understand that when I thought that, I've got a grand plan that I will get some good pictures of me taken, and I'll send a letter to the news editor of the News of the World, and I'll sell myself to him and he'll hire me. I thought, I have great ideas, but now looking back, I don't think I did have great ideas. I think they were things that were sort of, given to me, really.
This is incredibly fascinating, this. Before we talk about, I want to stay with working for, as you described it, the commercial arm of MI6. Just remind our listeners, Christine, when you were living in the bedsit and you went undercover to meet a man, to be his companion, to learn things for him, or from him even, or to get things out of him. What sort of people were they? How high end did that get? I mean, was that serious stuff? Was that national security stuff?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, there was pretty much a need to know basis, really. And they didn't ever, sit me around a table and say,
And debrief you, basically.
Sorry?
They didn't I was going to ask that. They didn't debrief you afterwards. Were you unknowingly wired for those encounters without even knowing that, or were you wired? Did you know you were wired?
Oh, sometimes you'd be wired, but most often, no, you wouldn't be wired. You just go in and you'd be on your own, and you'd have to get the information, whatever that was, even if it was just, a fishing expedition, to just get close to somebody just to find out what they were doing. So mostly, it was really powerful individuals. It was usually involved a lot of money. They were foreigners, Russians, sometimes a lot of Russians, South Africans, usually foreign people that were up to things I think that probably our government didn't want them to be up to, or that were a threat,
Diplomats even from time to time, Christine.
That kind of thing, yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it? And there you are, you're in your early 20s, you outside of that, you described there living in your bedsit and not really connecting with people in that. Does that feel very far removed from where you are today? I mean, does it feel like an eternity ago is that, or are you still connected to that? Does that still feel very real for you, as much as it did then?
Well, no, because I came after I went in the group on Facebook, and I it took a long time. I was 3 years in that group, not really believing there was such a thing called Monarch mind control. And I was just observing the people in there, chatting to one or two of them. And there was a particularly clever girl in there called Louise, and I got talking to her quite a lot. And I think she's a therapist now for deprogramming. Louise Clark, she's called, with an E. And she said to me one day about memories. And I said, well, a lot of my memories, especially around the parties I was about 11, 12, still twice a year going back to these parties. And the Crusade of Rescue have still got a file on me. I mean, they're quite sinister, and they're still in operation. They are now called the Catholic Children's Society, and they're really secretive. They've got a file on me, and I'm not allowed to see it. When I ask about the parties, they say, oh, well, we always keep in contact with our children. I mean, they are so sinister. It's unreal. And she said to me, because I didn't have the memories, I said, I've tried hypnosis, I've tried EMDR, I've tried everything to get full recall of my childhood. I really wanted it to feel whole. And she said, what do you see when you try and reach it? I said, well, I know what I see. It's there. It's a block. And she said, what kind of block? And I said, it's just like kind of a screen. And she said, is there anything on the screen? And I said, yeah, cartoons. And she said, well, what kind of cartoons? I said, that's easy, Disney cartoons. And she said, what ones? I said, I like Donald Duck. And she said, that's Donald Duck mind control. And I thought, oh, God, this woman's mad.
You thought she was off her head when she said that, yeah. Yeah.
I said, I thought there's no such thing. And I remember feeling a feeling of like dread. And I kind of closed down Facebook and I put it in Google, Donald Duck mind control. And I sort of pressed it really slowly. I thought, I don't want to think that this has happened to me, this shit. And it came up and there was so much of it. And I just felt it's overwhelming to think, well, has that happened to me? Because the first thing you feel like is, well, where's my bloody compensation? If I haven't been living my life, where's my payoff now? You know, where do I go to get, to take out a lawsuit and get my bloody compensation? That was my first thought. And then I started looking through Fritz Springmeier's books and reading more about it. And it said, mostly they use Catholic orphanages in a certain, between certain dates when I was in there to experiment on them. And I just started to feel like more and more uncomfortable, especially as they said that they use the girls as, I think it's something called beta or delta programming, which is spy programming and sex kitten programming. And interestingly, I had never owned my sexuality. It was always triggered, and I'd always wondered why it was triggered. Like, when I started working for the News of the World, I started having sex with Greg Miskiw, who was the news editor, and it was like the switch for my sexuality was outside of myself, and it was triggered not by me but by something else. Like when I started getting interested in the IRA, I wondered why I was getting interested in the IRA. I found myself reading books about them, and next thing I found myself having a relationship with one of them, and my sexuality was just it's almost like the switch was flicked, and it was a part of myself that I didn't have that somebody else had, and they could give it back to me when they wanted it to be activated. Do you know what I mean? That sounds weird. I do.
No, it doesn't. No, I was going to say to you a few minutes ago, I really don't understand that at all, but you've explained it brilliantly. Now, you have. The IRA then, that came after you joined the News of the World, or have I got my timeline wrong there?
No, that was after I joined the News of the World.
So it was after, that's right, so I was right. Now, again, you're drawn to this. Do you think that those who manipulated you from the time you were a young girl in the children's home were still using you, even at that stage? You're at the News of the World now, and we're going to talk about whether or not they bounced you from there, from working with high-powered businessmen and diplomats, as a honey trap, as a companion to get information from them. You're in the News of the World, and we'll talk about whether you feel that you were bounced into that line of work. I suppose when you look at it all laid out in front of you, you have to conclude, I suppose, well, you would anyway, I'm not concluding anything, but you would, I suppose, Christine, conclude that, again, there was no coincidence in your curiosity being piqued by the IRA. Again, you were being manipulated, right?
Yeah, because I remember reading a book about them, and I just picked it up, and it's called The Dirty War, and reading about how when they torture people, they make them sit on cookers and stuff. And I remember reading it and thinking, oh, surely not. Surely I'm not going to somehow get myself connected to Belfast. And the next thing, Greg Miskey was telling me to go out to Belfast on a job, which involved checking out the UDA, which I did. And then I found myself going down to Crossmaglen and getting in a car and just going around Crossmaglen. And then I made some contacts down there in the INLA. And then when the real IRA came to London, I had somebody heard about it, or no, I'd heard about it. The INLA guy told me that they were in London having a secret meeting. I then told the News of the World, and the News of the World said, go along to the meeting undercover. And I said, well, I'm not going to go undercover. And Graham Johnson, a journalist who I work with on the News of the World, he was coming along as well. And I looked at him and said, no way are we going to go in this pub in Kilburn undercover. And he said, no, let's just tell them who we are. So we went in and we told them, look, we're from the press, and they gave us an impromptu kind of press meeting. And I remembered one of them that I'd seen at this meeting that a local journalist had taken me to. And so I went over and tried to get some details. And then eventually I kind of got closer and closer gradually, and then found myself moving out to Belfast and getting even closer. And it was interesting because when I was out there, lots of the local journalists like Henry MacDonald and Rosie McGowan and Liam Clark from the Sunday Times, they were like, well, how come you're so close to the real IRA? How did you do it?
How did you manage? Yeah. Understandably, I'd be asking that.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. They were like, well, you're English. We've been here for like 20 odd years. How come they're giving you all their stories? And, how come you can go down to Dundalk and find out this, that and the other? And actually, the Sunday Times were quite sneaky about it. They acted like they were employing me, but then they would ask me to bring one of their snappers along. And I noticed the snapper was busy taking pictures of me when I was down there, like, oh, who is she meeting, So they were uncomfortably curious about what I was doing.
I suppose you could have said, well, I'm a better journalist than you, but even at that particular time, I suppose you might have subconsciously known that there was something else going on, that you had help, you had external help with this. It's exactly 13 minutes past the hour, folks. You're with the Ritchie Allen Show, brought to you live in association with DavidIcke.com on Fab Radio in Manchester here, alternate current radio, of course, over in the US, and the TuneIn app and all of that. Christine, Joanna Hart is on the line, former News of the World journalist, Sunday Times best-selling author. We're going to tweet out links to Christine's books. Her story is absolutely extraordinary. We've heard similar stories to it before. Cassie O'Brien has been on this programme in the past. Fritz Springware has been on this programme in the past. Christine believes, I think it's fair to say, without putting words in her mouth, that her extraordinary life, and she's a very young woman, this woman, by the way, about my age, and her extraordinary life has led her from a children's home to working for private detectives owned by the commercial wing or the commercial arm of MI6, where she ended up basically being the companion of very, very powerful men in politics, in business, diplomats, at the behest of MI6 to glean information from these people. She believes that she was then directed subconsciously, whatever, into the News of the World. Earlier on in the conversation, we talked about how being compelled to find out about serial killers, like the Hillside Strangler, like Ian Brady, the Moors murderer, that she began to realise that there was much more to her story than maybe she knew. And that's when we talked about Monarch mind control which we know the intelligence agencies have used and have used for a long time, for decades, goes hand in hand with MK Ultra as well. Christine, if you think I'm doing a complete balls, excuse my language, of this summing up, jump in any time. But I want to kind of sum up, it's just absolutely amazing. So where are we then? So
we got to the real IRA part, which when I found myself having a sexual affair with one of the commanders, and also at the same time having a sexual affair with a SAS guy who Alex Marinchek from the News of the World introduced me to, a guy called Charlie Johnson. So I found myself doing that, which at the time I thought, oh, this is interesting. It's very like Christine Keeler, the sort of two guys from the different side of the fence. It makes me sound slutty, but it just was something I was compelled to do. But then I found out afterwards by talking to this woman, Anna, and talking to people that know. I mean, I write to James Casbolt, he's in prison at the moment. He also had a similar life where he grew up in an orphanage and had, I think he did some kind of investigations, but he told me that when you touch your body with somebody, with a man during sex, you can download information and sometimes you can transfer it to someone else. I don't know if that is true, but it's certainly interesting.
It's certainly very interesting. I'll tell you what else is interesting. But just to stay with that for a second, the idea is that physical contact, information is exchanged, and somebody who knows how to then decode that or download it, somebody a bit more in the know, they could then get that. That is fascinating. But I mean, having an affair with a commander in the real IRA and having a relationship with somebody in the SAS, you could have been killed, Christine, regardless of who was handling you, unknown to you, or who was directing you, again, unknown to you. That's the sort of thing that gets people killed, isn't it?
Yeah, I did feel, now and again when I was like down in Dundalk and in one of the bars and it was like really late, sort of, early in the morning, or when I was back at this particular man's house, I did sort of, it's almost like, I had different parts of me that, at one point, it sounds funny now, but it's not, to sort of all of a sudden wake up to find yourself in the bedroom of an empty house right in the middle of the countryside near Dundalk, and you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm in a commander of the Real IRA's house. It's in the middle of the night. What if he wakes up and all of a sudden decides that I'm an English bitch and, murders me and leaves me like Robert Nayrack, in his back garden or something. Kind of, and it's almost like I had one side of me that was gung-ho and didn't mind doing what I was doing and would happily rifle through his mobile while he was asleep and, have a good old look round. And another side that was more sedate and that used to kind of suddenly realize, what the hell am I doing? And almost felt like now and again, I found myself in situations where I was like really vulnerable like that, like just running for it, just kind of just running out of the house and thinking, what the hell am I doing? Do you know what I mean? That was that I had a kind of dual nature. And I remember this particular commander, and I won't mention his name, I've written about him, which the IRA aren't very happy with me, he said to me, you're two people. He said, one side is really exciting and sexy. And he said, and I have to say the other side is really boring and dreary and gets on my wick. And, these are quite really dominant men and they don't take shit, So you don't sort of screw them around, you don't play the arse with them because, they can just knock you off and not really give a damn,
No, yeah, and then go and have a beer, yeah. That's the psychosis of it. I wanted to, I just dialed it up there and then I've just lost it. I just wanted to give out your Twitter account. It's at Red Queen of Hearts, isn't that right?
Yeah.
It's at Red Queen of Hearts. That's where you find Christine on Twitter. It's exactly 19 minutes past the hour. We've probably got another half an hour, 35 minutes on this. It's absolutely interesting. I will tell you this, Christine, we've had several hundred tweets on it. I'd say about, listening to you, I've been just scanning down them. I'd say 65 to 70% are very interested and are sympathetic to what you're saying, and I've heard this before and believe you. And others are saying Christine even is too matter of fact, we're not buying this. One or two are saying maybe these are remembered memories, or maybe these are implanted memory. So it's interesting. And if people want to find and read what others are saying, you need only go to Twitter, put Ritchie Allen Show, all one word in. Once you press enter, you'll see every tweet that was sent to me, and you can see some good, bad, and indifferent. And I mean, you're a big girl, Christine. You've been, you're a writer, you're a journalist. You'd expect that. Some people say this is just absolutely fantastic, but I do get the impression, listening to you and having a little chat with you off air today, there are parts of it, I think, now correct me if I'm wrong, is that you might still be wondering whether, how much of the memory is absolutely clear and intact, how much of it is, definitely happened, and how much of it maybe is still a bit blurred. How is that for you when you look back at these things?
Do you mean because you were saying implanted memories. Do you mean the real IRA stuff? Because there's stories with my byline on to back that up. So it's not like, oh, are you remembering? I mean, I've actually done stories on the real IRA where I am now done in Dundalk interviewing them. So they're, the memory's not implanted; it's there in black and white.
Yeah. Oh no, listen, I'm not suggesting that.
Oh,
you're
okay.
no, not at all. No, I'm just. It's just some listeners are saying maybe some of what Christine remembers, maybe some of it might not have happened, and she's been conditioned to remember things in a certain way. No, I'm just saying what people are, one or two people are saying. But as I said, the majority of tweets coming in are from people who have heard similar stories to this before. They're aware of the programmes, MK Ultra and Monarch, and they're fascinated by it. As I said, people can follow what others are saying on Twitter and argue with them or agree with them or whatever. I'm absolutely fascinated by it because, obviously through my connection with David, this is stuff that I've become very familiar with over the last few years. Getting into the news of the world then, I mean, this is absolutely fascinating. And how that happened, how that occurred. And again, we believe from what's happened to you up to this point, again, that obviously at the time might have felt like an opportunity came up and it was something you wanted to do. You're very bright, you're very clever. But again, you think you were guided in there, right?
To the news of the world. Yeah, I think so. I don't think I'm that. I think I'm too passive. I don't think I'm that bright that I would have done that on my own. I just think I was guided. I always thought I was guided in life, but I assumed that I had angels guiding me or something. Right. But then when I sort of, met Anna and she told me what she did, then it was rather pointed out that actually they weren't angels. It was, the other guys, the dark side. And I suppose that made more sense because after all, the news of the world is quite dark. So, and I was earning plenty of money, so it wasn't exactly Gandhi. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And what was that? I mean, what was that like? We look at it as it has now such a terrible reputation following the phone hacking revelations, and eventually Murdoch closed it down. Of course, he wasn't long about putting out The Sun on Sunday, and I remember growing up in the 80s and in the early 90s when I was finishing high school and before I went to uni. The News of the World had a reputation in Ireland, like the Sunday World, as being kind of a kiss and tell paper and a sleazy rag. However, that's kind of unfair because I also remember it doing some incredibly brilliant investigative journalism as well. Really important scoops, stuff that was really in the public interest. What were those early times like for you, Christine, at that paper? What was the environment like to work in?
Well, it was, it was fun. I mean, I started working for them as a private investigator. I then got very close with Greg. We started dating and going out. He was the news editor and he ran the office basically. And interestingly, another ex-boyfriend of mine, Phil Hall, he was the overall editor. And it was like a family, it was very, we were all very close. And it was just really interesting. I mean, we had an in to everything. We had MPs, secretaries used to ring the news desk and give us the lowdown on what they were doing. Phil used to go and meet Tony Blair for breakfast. And it felt very powerful to be a part of them. It just, it was really, really hard when phone hacking came in and John Boyle basically wipe me out. He took over from my position as head honcho investigator, and I'd been there then about 10 years. So it kind of, no, not 10 years. It was from 1993, and when I introduced him, it was about 2000. So it kind of, it felt almost like you're kind of superhuman in a way. It makes it, it did inflate my ego to be part of them. I felt very elite and felt very powerful. You go and knock on somebody's door like Bob Geldof or Mick Jagger, and you say, I'm from the News of the World. And immediately you see fear in their eyes, no matter who it is. And that power can really go to your head, but in a nasty way. You feel almost like Nazi SS or something. It was quite aggressive, and we used to target people, and but you just did feel that, because I remember after being pushed out, basically, it felt almost like, oh, I'm back as a civilian. And it felt really weird. It was, even though I started working then for the Sun until 2008, it was quite a heavy drop. It was a very, very powerful organization when it was going. It wasn't like, you might remember, it's just sexual stories, and it's not. It did a lot of tearing down governments. It was a powerful newspaper, actually, politically.
It was, and I'm going to ask you a question now. You might know the answer, you might not know the answer, you might not want to give me the answer, but looking back on it, you mentioned there that it targeted people, and you mentioned that it was powerful in a nasty way. Do you think that the News of the World was being manipulated to do what it did, and that it went beyond the likes of Rebecca Brooks and any other editor, that it went way above them? It went above governments, do you think? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, probably. I would say so. Yeah, it did really. It was run in a really weird way. It was almost run in a Masonic way. It had different layers. And even though Greg Miskey was my superior, when he introduced me to Mazen Mahmood and I started working, we worked as a team. I was his wife, he was a sheikh. It was another layer revealed to me. He was very close with Rebecca. And it was like he was up a notch from where Greg Miskey and even Phil Hall, even though he was the overall editor, he was up a notch from that, which is quite interesting that he's got a trial coming up later this month, so I won't say too much about him, that he was one of the bishops. It was like a chessboard, really. Definitely the whole setup of the News of the World, and I don't think that some of the editors actually felt what was going on at the top. It was, it just had these layers of secrecy,
Yeah, I do. Yeah. But, I mean, like you, I've been through, working for organisations. I've never worked for anything like the News of the World. Now, I'm not going to compare myself to you, not like that, but I've been. I've worked at a very, very successful commercial radio station with an enormous audience. And, I've been thinking all day about talking to you, Christine. I'm thinking that News of the World was much more than meets the eye. It wasn't just dodgy, media baron Rupert Murdoch's big British newspaper, Sunday newspaper. I've always felt it was much, 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 much deeper than that. And that it was used, by those who have certain plans for the world, and for us it was used. And that's why it's fascinating that we're now going to talk about, at exactly 29 minutes past the hour, we're now going to talk about the idea that I've always felt anyway, that the whole phone hacking scandal was basically, and just again for our listeners who might be or they might be anywhere else but Britain, and they might vaguely know what that phone hacking is, and they might wonder, the phone hacking, you're better placed to describe it than me, Christine. We all remember the Millie Dowler, of course. We all remember that. We remember the umpteen well-known men and women from sport, from the media, from TV and films, but obviously the Millie Dowler. The revelations that journalists were hacking into the voicemails of people in order to extract information. Do you want to give people a very brief summary of what the phone hacking scandal was?
Well, basically, when I started working for the News of the World, I brought my skills, which were like almost like a kind of psychic thing, where they would ask me to do something, say, find out, find out if someone's having an affair with someone else, and they would ask me to do it, and I would kind of meditate on it, and then I would kind of know intuitively who to go to, who to target, what to say to get the information. And I did this for a number of years. And then they kind of got a bit, it's almost like they wanted to own the power that I had. And I was having, basically, I felt almost as if the paper was leaning on me. Certainly Greg Miskey was leaning on me. I was just living over the bridge from the News of the World, and he'd come round my flat at his lunch hour and say, you know, we've got this story going on about Diana, we've got that story, we've got this story, you know, what do I do here, what do I do there? So there was a kind of a heavy weight on me to kind of find out, you know, to stand up the stories, basically. And when I was overwhelmed, I think it was one time when I got myself put in hospital because Greg was shouting at me down the phone, and I just literally had far too much work for just one person. And I had a panic attack, which felt like a heart attack, and I was rushed to hospital. And Greg basically appeared around the curtains when I was strapped up to the heart monitor, and he then said to me, look, you silly cow, you're not having a heart attack. It's just a bloody panic attack. And he took me to a nearby bar, and I said, I can't do this anymore. And he said, well, find someone like you. And I didn't know anybody who could do what I could, because I felt I was using my intuition to do it. And basically, I think I'd given them a thirst to Greg said that I'd open up vistas for them, you know, so I didn't know what to do. And I had been dating John Boyle on the side, seeing him now and again. He was a lover basically from my past. And because I'd seen him just a week before that, I said, look, there's somebody that I can introduce you to, you know, someone who mainly works for MI6's commercial arm. He's very well connected with Hacklight and KCS Limited. And, you know, he only works for them, but I know him, and, you know, he might work for you. So the next day when I got over my heart attack stroke panic attack, I woke up and I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to introduce him to no way I'm going to introduce Mr. Big Boyle to the News of the World, because it will push me out. And at that time I was earning a 6-figure salary. And for anybody who's tweeting that that's an implant, Panorama are going to do something coming up on investigators that worked for the News of the World. So I'm going to be in that. And so these aren't implanted memories. This is fact. And so I was earning a 6-figure salary, and I didn't want to. You know, obviously I'd gotten over what happened to me. I thought, well, I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot to bring in someone like John. And Greg rang me that morning and he said, oh, are you ready to introduce me to John? And I said, no, I've decided not to. And I could feel his anger down the phone. And I congratulated myself on pulling myself together and not being so stupid to introduce him to somebody that might well push me out, even though I arrogantly thought that nobody had these special abilities that I had. And so next thing he said to me, oh, okay, so you're not going to introduce me. Well, how do you spell his second name? And I thought, well, why are you asking me how to spell his second name? Obviously, he's decided to hunt the guy down and to just contact him directly. So I give him a fake spelling for his surname, and I slammed down the phone, and I felt very angry with Miscue for trying to hire somebody and push me out, B, trying to blag me to get the guy's surname so he could find him himself. And I was quite annoyed, and I was quite pleased with myself that I hadn't given him the contact details when I was feeling sick, you know, and in the hospital. And I just went over to the other side of the room and I answered an email from one of the sisters at my aunt's convent, and Sister Mary Lou, and she rang me And I'd been talking to her about Boyle and saying I was going to bring him in. And I said, oh, I just got a phone call from Greg Miskew talking about, my pains that I'd had in my chest. And she said, you must introduce the News of the World to John Boyle. And I put down the phone after I spoke to her, found myself picking it up again, dialing Greg Miskew, and I said, oh, Greg, I will introduce you to John Boyle. And he said to me, what do you mean, what? Like in this really annoying little boy's voice. And I said, yeah, I will introduce you. And he said, well, do it now. And I said, well, I'll set up dinner. And he said, dinner, yes, let's go and have dinner somewhere like Caprice tomorrow night. Set it up. And I rang John and I set up the meeting. And when we all had dinner together, the three of us, I went for a walk. And I knew that my time with the News of the World was over. And I knew at that point that hacking, cyber hacking, the whole caboodle had been offered to Miskew completely. And that was it, the sealed deal. And it was odd that after that, when I lost a six-figure sum, and basically I was just left working for the Daily Mail, I think I was only about 40 grand a year, but it was a big drop to lose the News of the World to John Boyle. It was literally overnight. And John also, I think he must have hacked me for everyone else I was working for, because I was working for the Sunday Mirror and they stopped ringing me overnight. So basically they took up the hacking. And I then, after working for John, using John for, I think it was about 3 years, they then decided, it was Greg that decided that he didn't want to pay £1,000 a pop for the hacking. So he basically stole John's office boy called Glenn Mulcair. Now, when the shit hit the fan, and Mulcair, because he's not very bright and he was just trained to do all the spy stuff, he didn't really know what he was doing.
We must just mention here now two things. Firstly, Mulcair is the guy who hacked Millie Dowler's phone, right? Yeah. And the royal family. Well, he did everybody. I worked on the Millie Dowler case as well. I've been questioned by Operation Wheating in Putney about Dowler, because they found some invoices where I'd mentioned Dowler. So, shall we just remind our listeners, she was murdered by a guy called Levi Belfield, I believe it is. He was convicted of it anyway. She was a very young girl, God love her, and the murder was shocking. Obviously, it was a major story. And we learned, a few years back that the News of the World had access to her voicemail and that Mulcair was behind it. It's also worth pointing out at this stage, and I'll ask you as well, Christine, that John Boyle disputes pretty much everything you're saying. It's fair to say that, right? We've got to mention that John would dispute that. He's not here, obviously, to talk about it, but he would dispute your account of your relationship with him and what happened at the News of the World.
Yeah, but you can read a book called The News Machine, written by the editor of the Sunday Express, James Hanning, and everything I've been saying is in there. So, including me, including John.
Oh yeah,
so
I'm
it's all in there.
I mean, we
don't take my word for it, trolls.
Yeah,
Sorry, I just hate people saying things like, "Oh, a memory implant," and "Oh, that's not true." Well, it's already been catalogued. It's already been written about. I just hate trolls that come out with crap when you're trying. The reason why I'm telling the story is we do have people that are controlling us. We do have, looking back at the bishop and what went on at the Crusader Rescue, there's people, there's entities controlling them, and they're non-human. And the entity that they attach to Bianchi obviously is one of these experiments. They're Draco reptilians, basically.
Which again, when you said that to David Icke, I can imagine David's eyes must have lit up, because again, it's something he's been talking about for years, and it's been misrepresented so many times in the British press and in the world press. What he's actually saying, which is what you've described there. No, I'm not, again, by just saying that Boyle would dispute that, I'm just pointing that out. I'm not disputing what you're saying.
No, I don't care. No,
No, I'm very interested in this, because it goes along neatly alongside so much of what I've heard from men and women on this programme, and even when I was in London a few years back doing this as well. Christine, I'm thrilled that you're on the programme talking about this. I want to talk a little bit about Ian Brady in a minute, but again, I want to talk about what's it like for you when you realise that while Millie Dowler, God love her, and her family, the phone was hacked, while so many celebrities' phones were hacked, that ultimately, again, unknown to the British people, that the whole thing was a massive setup and a psyop. Again, as David, he's not here, he coined the phrase problem, reaction, solution. To get a reaction from the public, this is unacceptable. We can't have this. We need more restriction on the press. When that dawns on you that that's the real reason for it, that's really evil, that, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't get any more malevolent than that. You know, to set up a whole operation like that so that the public will accept clamping down on the press in the long term. And you'll have gombeans, as we say in Ireland, like Hugh Grant, you know, pity me Hugh Grant, you know, demanding that the press is censored and this, that and the other thing. And I think, I mean, to me it always smacked of a big psychological operation. What's it like for you when you realise that?
Yeah, well, I realised that, you know, after Anna came forward, and it was hard for me to come to terms with that phone call. You know, the phone call I got from the Nun to, oh, you must ring John Boyle. And, you know, to get to that, because I'd shot myself in the foot and lost a 6-figure sum, I'd lost my status as quite a powerful person on the News of the World, because all of a sudden it was phone hacking. They don't need me using my brain, using my skills, because it was all hack, 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 hack. So I'd shot myself in the foot. So it's very, very hard for quite a strong person to realize they'd done that. And looking at it, I couldn't come to terms with that I had done something so stupid. And then when Anna came along and said to me about the control, it made sense that someone from the Vatican had then come in at that very important point and almost overrode me. Do you know what I mean? They've overrode me to get that done, to get that show on the road of bringing in this MI6 connected man who brought in something he learned from those MI6 agencies, which is all the cyber crime. And they were doing more than that. I have been interviewed by Operation Tulleter. There was celebrities were email hacked as well. Because they knew how to email hack, because, you know, that was given to them as well. The whole caboodle was given to them. So that my autonomy was overrode at that point to bring it on board. And I just thought that when Nick Davies, because Nick and I hung out, the guy from The Guardian, we hung out for a long, long time. And I thought, that he would put me in his book. He promised to, because I'd helped him so much. But he put me in, but he used a code name, even though I'm in the back of the list of investigators that work for the News of the World. When he wrote about me in the book, he called me a code name, and he totally left out the MI6 connection. And that, I think, was the final straw where I thought to myself, this is completely 100% what David Icke had said in his book, a psyop, completely. That was the proof that I needed to just completely nail it down, because MI6 connection, the British state connection, was completely left out. And it was left out by Nick Davies. And Nick Davies was the Mr. Powerful who wrote the book that everyone sucked up. And if you read it on Amazon, everyone's, oh, it's so brilliant. So, oh, Nick, you're great. Nick this, Nick that, Nick the other. But actually, his book was just a cuts jobby. Okay, it was his cuts jobby, but he completely left out John. He left out me. I'm not important, but he left out me because I lead to John, and John leads to the MI6 connection. So all he's got is basically this little office boy that's painted like this mad PI that went ahead and hacked the royal family just because he had a big head. Well, it wasn't like that. The whole thing, there's a completely different story. And Nick left out this story. And I spoke to a very powerful female investigator called Sylvia Jones, who works for Panorama. I think she's retired now. She's getting on a bit. And she wanted to tell this whole story. And she said to me, she said, Christine, she said, I can't get them to agree to do the story on John. I said, why not? She said, too powerful. He's done too much work for the state. He's untouchable.
Now, on that, got to ask this. And again, I know it's only going to be speculation, but in your case, you are very well placed to speculate. Has the deep state used the big selling newspapers of this country to bury the scale of child abuse in this country?
I don't know. Do you know, because it's happened to me as a child, when people mention stuff like that, I tend to close off. And I was talking to a friend about that, and she said, you've really got to start exposing this. And she said exactly the same as you've just said to me. And she said to me that I'm going to be useless unless I really face what happened to me as a child and then get over it. Because when someone mentions stuff like that, I'm like, oh, okay, you know, change the subject, change it. Because it brings up like my pain. Do you know what I mean? But
no, I fully understand that. Like I said, it would only be speculation on your part anyway. I mean, I suspect that they have. I suspect they've been controlled.
I think, Ritchie, it's the churches. I think it's the churches, and at the end of the day, I think David's right that it does go to these off-world entities. I mean, I did speak a lot to Douglas Dietrich, who worked with Colonel Michael Aquino. He's a fascinating guy, and basically he says everything leads back to the occult. And when I had this Monarch stuff done to me, they get a part of you and they shave it off, and then this part of you is made very, very psychic, and they send it off to these wars in the astral. And then when the programming breaks down, which it does, I think when you're about 35 to 40, it breaks down. So you get your parts back. And I've still got astral consciousness, and I can go into the astral and see these Draco reptilians. And what they do is, David is completely right. They come in and they host on different people. And these days, more and more, they, you know, not only are these entities, you know, whatever they are, I don't know why they look the way they look, but they do look like the way they look. They are lizard-like. The royal lizards are these draconians, and they basically come inside the rulers. And it is the churches. They're inside them, and they don't like certain bloodlines. And the bloodline that they have got the most against is the Nordic, the Norse, Odinist bloodline, the blue-eyed Aryan race, the Aryan Irish, because they have a certain amount of psychic power that they are able to fight against them. So that is why we are being now basically destroyed by bringing in the sort of different blood and kind of wiping us away. So the bottom line is not human beings.
Could you imagine? I do, yeah. I mean, could you ever have imagined writing for the News of the World, the work on the Sunday Times, your work for the commercial arm of MI6? Could you ever have imagined there would come a time when you would be saying things like that out loud? No, you couldn't.
No,
could you? Really?
I actually met a friend. I met a friend in the park once, and we were walking around. And when this Anna had come forward to say that she thought I'd been a monarch in this mind program, I said to this friend, you know, I said, this is so nutty, that mind control. I said, but I've got this horrible, weird feeling that I'm going to somehow believe it and then go and start talking about it in public. And this friend said, well, of course you're not. And I said, oh, God, wouldn't that be terrible? Because it would give your enemies so much, like a big baseball bat to hit you with. Oh, look at that nut over there. They think that they've been mind controlled, and now they're talking about lizards. What a nutbag. You know, it hands them so much power because it's such a big bat to beat you with, isn't it? Oh, do you believe in Draco? Yeah, okay, take another pill.
They've suppressed them. I mean, they work hard, the elites do anyway, and those who do control us, they obviously work very hard on suppressing our sense of the possible. And that's why people react like that. I mean, I used to be that person. I would have watched recordings of David Icke on Terry Wogan years ago and felt very bad for David and felt that he was crazy.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
but not bullied him, not looked at him and gone, what an idiot. No, but I would have felt sorry for him. And others like that, yeah. But then you have experiences, and there are things you just can't turn a blind eye to anymore. I want to ask you, and I'm delighted you went to see David, by the way. I really am, and that we connected with you. Christine, you mentioned earlier on, and I just want to go back to it, that obviously I'm in Manchester, and we have an enormous audience in Manchester. That's not to boast. We do, because we're on a very popular platform in Manchester at Fab Radio. And you mentioned Ian Brady. Now, obviously, Brady, of course, killed a lot of children many years ago with Moira Hindley. And that story is, it's a horrible story. It's a very dark part of Manchester's past. You've met the guy, and I know maybe more than one of your encounters with him was very sinister and spooky. And I know you wrote in the Express some years ago that he tried to grab you, or maybe he did grab you. And you're certainly, and I've got to say this because I will get absolutely trolled by Mancunians. You are not in any way giving Brady a pass, whatever, for what he did. But you believe that there's more to his story than meets the eye in terms of why he was doing what he was doing, don't you?
Yeah. You know why? There's a clue to that as well. I mean, I appeared on a ITV, I think it was an ITV thing they did recently about the Moors case, and they asked me to come along. I sat with Helen Hill, who did it. I think it was the BBC. I sat with her for about 2 hours, and I actually said, look, I've investigated evil most of my life because I knew, something had happened to me that was connected with that. I was very much called evil. You're a bastard. You're illegitimate. You come from a kid's home. You're evil. And then when I saw these serial killers called evil, I kind of smelt a rat with, the church doing this. And so I kind of thought there'd be answers there. So I did really try and get close to Brady to find out what had gone on with him. And also with Bianchi in the second case, and also Jeremy Bamber, the other guy who I believe also was fiddled with. Brady went to Borster when he was younger. He was also an orphan. He's got these separate altars. There was always something about the murders that I thought was suspect. The occult is very, very present in all of, in what he did. There's ritual, there's occult, there's black magic involved in it. That was all wiped out. Again, with Kenneth Bianchi, after the trial, somebody came forward called Darcy O'Brien and wrote The Hillside Stranglers. Now, he used his own imagination to write a novel, basically, on why the Hillside Stranglers did it and how Angelo Bono was the lead guy. Bianchi was just a little kid who went along with him. The whole thing is crap. It was very much a demonic torture. Stigmata was used, the kind of Antichrist, the Antichrist signs, the electrocution on the hands. It was Bianchi who roped in Bono. They almost have this, when they have the demons attached to them, they have the hypnotic power to hypnotize their little friends to go along with them, like Bianchi hypnotizing Angelo Bono, Brady having the hypnotic effect over Dave Smith and Moira Hindley, and basically that gives them that certain power to create a kind of a cult. And Brady talks about having an altar. He doesn't know basically what happened to him. Having an altar, he calls it a black box that he doesn't reach and he's not in connection with. And I was sharing this with Helen Hill, and basically she just kind of she gave me about 2 minutes screen time. She cut everything I said. I said evil, the bottom line of evil, go to David Icke's work, study that, what he's saying about reptilians, you've got that. And my whole life's work has come back to that conclusion. I don't need to repeat what he said. And she goes, oh, now you're getting really weird talking about David Icke. He's a nutter. And I'm like, well, that's the bottom line. You're asking me, and I have, got close to these people. You haven't, Helen, with respect. So why don't, you don't dismiss what I'm saying, about David Icke's research. It's absolutely bang on. And she said, I'm sorry, it's too woo-woo for me to talk about reptilian entities and MK Ultra. So she did this program, and it was unbelievable that she'd got quotes from John McVicker and other people, and she made out that Brady, that bank robbers, and these were hard men, were threatened that if they go in a cell with Brady, it's a big punishment to them. And I've met Brady, and honestly, he is like a little. Sorry to say, he's like a little girl, but he is the most weak. I mean, Brady and Bianchi, they're kind of similar, and they're firstly they're gay men. They're very gay. They're very effeminate. They're very girlish and like petulant, and they're totally not what the BBC likes to make out. Bank robbers, no way. Hard men would not be afraid of Ian Brady. They would absolutely not be afraid of them. And when I talked to the Sunday Express over the fact that he rammed his tongue down my throat when I went to visit them, they said, oh, you were sexually abused by them, you were attacked by him. But I wasn't attacked by him. He kind of lunged at me and slobbered over my face, and I was kind of standing there out of my depth at bloody 8:30 at night in a dark room, left alone with a serial killer, trying to find out what had gone on, and using myself as kind of bait, and basically very, very out of my depth, because when I came out of there, I was in complete shock. But I was very determined to get really as close as I could to him to find out what had gone on. And what I did find out was he doesn't know. And he's very disconnected to what he did, but he does rather ham it up to the media because he's got nothing else. He's very weak. He's very,
as you said, effeminate and
he's very
and
effeminate.
petulant.
They're all effeminate. They're all they're gay. They're homosexual men that do these crimes. They're male part of them. It's like almost it's been taken out.
Christine, we're going to have to leave it there. We're right up on time. What I want to thank you for coming on. It's flown by, and ask you to come back again, and we'll pick up these subjects again in the future. I want to mention you can find Christine on Twitter. It's at Red Queen of Hart on Twitter, at Red Queen of Hart. I recommend her books, folks. You can find online at any good online retailer In for the Kill by Christine, and of course Searching for Daddy. And we mentioned the Nick Davis book earlier on. We'll tweet links to those. Thanks for doing that. It's extraordinary. It's fascinating.
The main book that's got everything in is the how Nick Davies hired me to spy on my former colleagues at the News of the World. That's the main one. And of course, my show is Valkyries at Revolution Radio every Thursday night.
Brilliant. That's on Revolution Radio every Thursday night. What time is that UK time?
Oh God, I don't know. It's 7:00 my time, but I've got a YouTube channel, Valkyrie at Revolution Radio, so you can.
That's
just
where
go
all
to
the shows
that.
go on. All the archive shows go on there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Christine, absolutely incredible. Thanks so much for doing it. Really enjoyed listening.
Thank you for having me. You've been a really good interviewer. I've really enjoyed you.
Well, the pleasure was all mine, and the invitation to come back again is really sincere. Anytime, come back and talk to us. Brilliant stuff.
Oh, thank you, Ritchie, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Christine. Brilliant. Christine, Joanna Hart on the line to us there from her home.